Hello everyone. Happy Sunday. I hope you're doing very, very well. We're going to continue our descent into the 30-day world by finally getting into the third column and thus joining DeVay Breon Jackson as being a third columnist. So the question for today is the 8th of April or the 4th of August, as the case may be, and that is, are there evil races in your world such as Drow? So rather than doing what I've done the last couple of times, and mainly because I feel that I've already answered it in the short version in previous days, I'm going to actually, rather than answer the question directly, I'm actually going to talk a bit about my philosophy regarding race. I've had some interest in theories and discussions of race, particularly in transmedia like role-playing games, but also in just general media like literature and video games especially. And it really does strike me as very interesting that the question that arises is whether or not there are evil races as opposed to good races. The distinction that we've got to make first is that the way that race is being used in Dungeons and Dragons, and actually by extension this question, is very different from how we use race nowadays. Race nowadays actually makes reference to the idea of phenotypic qualities such as color of skin, facial features, height, these kind of things. Those are what we talk about when we talk about race in our modern day. What this is talking about is actually a bit different, although it still has that element of phenotypic quality. It uses an archaic version of the use of race. Race as people would often use it in the pulp era. And then it was this definition that really included things like society, culture, and really would have a harder distinction between the qualities and personalities of those who are part of a race and those who are outside of it. As an example of that, a modern day holdover of that is the distinction between Jewish communities and those outside of the Jewish community. And it is reflected in our language from phrases like, as a people, X is Y. Now, to very finely walk this tightrope, some of the perceptions that would occur as a result of this idea that someone's race defined so much about them was actually this concept that, in fact, a person of a particular race could not exceed the bounds of their race. They could not become better or different, and this inevitably proceeded to cause a stratification of what human beings defined as being race. Similarly, in role-playing games such as Dungeons and Dragons, you actually can see that there are some of these old ideas playing through. This isn't because of any kind of agenda or opinion that people creating the games would feel. It is more to do with osmosis of sorts, that while is present, it still gives people the ability to interpret and distance themselves from this hard stratification of races. People who have listened in on the other episodes will probably come up with the idea that actually I'm in the negative. There are no evil races in my world, and they would be right. But I still feel that it's necessary to understand the context of why calling a race evil, or why people would actually think to call a race evil, and why it is important to recognize what it means to do just that. Remember that the archaic version of race, it has a moral component to it, as well as a cultural and phenotypic one. These moral judgments exist in a bit more muted but still rather racially charged stereotypes. People from Ireland are alcoholics. People from France surrender easily. And it goes on and on like this. These judgments are not true as a general rule, but they are used as a method of judging these people who would be called a race. So now comes how I use race in the world of Talum. The 5-3 cities area is a great mix of different peoples, migrants from other lands, people from other worlds, so on and so forth. The list will just go on. While I do not have a concept of a singular race in the form of its phenotypic definitional, racism is very alive and well in the land of the 5-3 cities because of this archaic method of defining race. It is more important where you hail from rather than who you actually are. It is more important to a person from Meridian whether or not you are from Hull than whether or not you are a dwarf or a drow or an elf or a monster or a beast. Every single one of the 5 free cities has some form of population mixing of the different races. There are no distinctions made between somebody from Hull, whether they be elf or halfling, insofar as they phenotypically exist. There are, however, distinctions on the basis of how long they have been a part of Hull and their acumen in their social standing. The 2 closest sections that seem to have a monoracial circumstance are the peoples of the plains and the peoples of the ocean. The peoples of the ocean almost exclusively live in a hermitage known as the Broten. Now, this location is generally very secluded, and the people of the ocean do not generally interact with people who are not of the noble classes. So as a result, it can actually be a bit more difficult to put down as a singular race or not. Now, the people of the plains of the Shift Reservation, on the other hand, do have a wide variance in their phenotypic standards outside of a very few phenotypic qualities. With all of that in mind, and it is, I admit, a lot, you can actually come to an idea that there are these cultural stereotypes that can take the place of what we define as racial ones nowadays. So, to list them off very quickly, Hull is seen as militaristic, stern, and angry at the other 4 cities for not being more like them. Sanguine is seen as the most abrasive, stubborn, and bordering on subordinate group of people, but simultaneously the most open and willing to communicate with the people of the plains and more willing to treat. The people of Meridian are seen as capricious and cruel, but only as long as they see themselves in control of the situation, at which point they become petulant. The people of Winternight are anarchic and are often seen to be the least loyal and more likely to devolve into their own infighting. And finally, we have Myrnal, who we will speak of another time. And that's it for my very short question and my very long answer. I hope you all enjoyed it. Now, rather than actually recommending something to you guys, today I happen to have nothing to me right now. So I do hope you all have a lovely day, and I'll see you next time. Ciao!